Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. And I think we're going to act as a panel and ask questions. So I'm just to give an introductory keynote speech, as I understand it, with the Belgian ambassador, who I didn't realize I was meeting, but I think this attempt to draw historic divisions between the British and the Belgians is a little unwise. The British were actually involved in the creation of Belgium as an independent state and fought at least one war in order to protect its continued existence and neutrality. So, and we always sided with the inhabitants of the Low Countries when we were fighting the French in our history. So I think the relationship between the Belgians and the British is perfectly sound, and I'm delighted to take part in a European discussion about how ties with India can be deepened, because India is not only one of my favourite countries, but it's an extremely important country to the United Kingdom. And as you probably noticed, the Prime Minister of the present government has put a particular emphasis, ever since he took over, on trying to deepen and make better use of the relationship that we have to have with India, which is a state with whom we need to be on close and friendly terms. There's absolutely no reason why we should not be so, and also to try to develop our trade and investment partnership with India, which is very important to us now and is going to be more important in the future. We were saying before we got on the platform that the role of your visiting political or semi-political keynote speeches is an interesting one to judge. I mean, you are going to have a day of experts explaining in detail the approach you should adopt if you're contemplating entering into the Indian market, either as an investor or a trader or both. There's absolutely no point in me doing an amateur trail for that and giving you my advice particularly. I first went to India about 40 years ago. I have been to India often enough. I have engaged actually in some business activities in India as well as political ones, but I haven't yet indulged in taking part in business conferences where I give practical advice to executives in particular areas of business about how they should conduct their business in the Indian market. What I do say is I welcome the conference because I commend the idea of getting involved in India to anybody in this country who has not yet done so and whose business is ready to embark on exporting to an extremely important, quite difficult and quite distinctive market, but one where an awful lot of British investors do very well. And the flow is, of course, in both directions. Our old historic political ties are the history of the countries having been entwined for about the last 300 years, nowadays takes the form of each country being a major investor in the other. We have a large Indian diaspora in this country with either newly arrived people from India, but these people of Indian ancestry now providing a significant, important part of our British population. I find when I'm in India that Indians take particular pride in the fact that there are now so many major Indian investments in this country. Our car industry only became the strongest in Europe when we ceased to have any British owners of any of our major car companies. And what Tata have been doing with Jaguar Land Rover is only one example of the benefits we derive in this country from the substantial amount of Indian investment that we seek to attract, as well as, I trust, the advantages we take to India with our investment and our trading activities there. I've been asked the question of how do we, or why should we, get a better relationship with India. That seems to me fairly obvious. It always has been, as modern British politicians have come to terms with the modern world. Actually, I always found India pretty crucial in the old Cold War world, and indeed when I was Chancellor. India is a giant country. Obviously, it's arguably the second. Nobody really knows, I think, for sure. It could even be the most populous country in the world. It plays a leading role. In the old Cold War days, it played a leading role in the neutral, the non-aligned world. We have a Commonwealth conference just taking place. Well, I used to actually take Commonwealth finance ministers' meetings very seriously and discovered what the value of the Commonwealth was through those meetings. The idea that Britain is the kind of leader of the British Commonwealth is somewhat illusory, and you rapidly have to adjust to the fact that the Indians are the dominant influence in a Commonwealth setting, or they certainly were in my day. The Indian finance minister was Manmohan Singh, who was engaging in a quite remarkable process of economic reform in India and bringing India into the modern market economy. I'm glad to say he became an extremely good personal friend of mine, but actually between us, actually meeting, touching base with the Commonwealth finance ministers before we went on to the IMF and the World Bank in order to get ourselves a bit of a base and find out where we agreed and where we disagreed occasionally, but not often. Going into the international arena brought home to me that the extraordinary political role that India played, as well as, of course, the extraordinary, rapidly growing economic transformation that was taking place and the powerful force that India was becoming set to be, which I still think was very largely the recent achievements of India have been, economically, have been very much the achievements of Manmohan Singh and those reforms that he carried out in the mid-1990s. Well, now we're in a globalized economy. The Cold War's behind us. We're in a globalized economy, truly globalized. India is no longer a faraway country. It just happens to be one of the most important markets, one of the biggest economic powers in the world. We're all playing with toys that we haven't played with before, so we've just gone into a catastrophic financial crisis over most of the West. We're still trying to get the rules right. Now we move ever increasingly to the free flows of capital, the unpredictabilities of a global marketplace with all its opportunities and the perils which many of us have in common. Remains important to stay in touch with India. And in the foreseeable future, if we are to do well as a country, we need to build up our base in India, build up our earnings there, continue to attract Indian investment, trade, participation in this country. And with our historic ties, with our common values, which distinguishes India from a lot of our other important trading partners, I think Indian democracy and the Indian respect for the rule of law are two of the miracles of the modern world. If you believe, as I do, in the importance of liberal, democratic, human rights values, then to achieve, as the Indians do, keeping all that going in a country of the vast size and diversity of India is certainly a minor miracle, but a very important one that it should succeed, and it is also a dynamic power. So nowadays, I hope my colleagues find when they're engaged in the G20, which is the real focus of international activity nowadays, far more important than the G7, which used to be the dominant place when I was Chancellor. In the G20, the Indians matter. And we've got to develop the G20. Our relationship with the Indians is important. When we agree with them, it is to our mutual advantage, I am sure. Now, what of the Indian economy? What of business for people like yourself who are about to get down to the nitty-gritty of how one might or might not do better in the Indian market? Well, like Indian politics, my judgment is at the moment it's somewhat stalled. And my current knowledge is that based on the fact that one of the things I'm trying to do in my present Cabinet Office role, I do take part in some of our trading activities, trying to help businesses get into overseas markets. I'm not the trade minister, that's Stephen Green. What I've particularly tried to give a lead in is particular sectors, particular countries. What I've chosen are the three big emerging market countries, Brazil, China, and India. The economies of the future, the giant economies, where the British presence is still quite inadequate compared with what we ought to achieve, though we're better placed in India than we are in China and Brazil, but our American and German friends tend to, if we're not careful, outshine us in all three. And India is particularly concentrate personally on healthcare, because India is steadily transforming all the time. The next big surge in investment in India, alongside the investment in their physical infrastructure, which they desperately need, is a surge of investment that's got to come in their public services for the generality of their population. One thing that India, Brazil and China have got in common, it seems to me, just about every other way, there couldn't be three countries that are more different. But one thing they have in common is they become rich countries, but their population has not, the bulk of their population has not benefited to the extent which they feel they should from the newly emerging wealth. And the way to achieve political success and stability and to move on in all those countries is to develop the public services for the generality of the population to the level that the country can now afford. And in health, as in other areas, you'll find that India, the links between the medical professions, the respect for the British health service, the diaspora again, and the two-way flows of students and medics just give a natural basis upon which the Britain, with its National Health Service, can get into partnership with people in Brazil. British healthcare companies, British healthcare institutions can actually participate as well. But it requires care, it requires patience, and it requires establishing the proper relationship in that market. And when I say it's stalled, that is because of politics. The great reforming phase has gone. That Indian politics is in a somewhat pre-election mode. So are we, but it hasn't had quite the paralysing effect on us yet, and it has had on decision-making in India. The present coalition is extremely disparate. It's Congress-dominated, but with some varying partners, because politics in India is no longer national, and in some states it's quite distinctive. So coalitions, whoever's in office, tend to be drawn from all kinds of political quarters. The Congress party is not quite the totally united and cohesive political machine that it might sometimes seem if you read about it from a distance. And until this election has settled the next stage in India's future, I do find things moving rather more slowly than I strongly suspect my old friend Manmohan Singh would like to see them move if he had a totally free hand and was able to press on with the liberalisation of their economy, making it easier for foreign investors like yourselves, actually opening up to competition and trade and taking part in modern global capitalism more than India now does, but it will all come. But having said that, though, what I will conclude by saying this is, when everybody says, and you'll read everywhere, everybody will tell you that India's a bit stalled at the moment, bear in mind it is comparative. They could be having a really bad year. Growth of their economy could even drop below 5%. It could be about 4.5%. That is a 4.5% growth rate in an economy with over 1 billion inhabitants and a prosperous consuming middle class, which is what now? Well over 400,000 people. I find myself dealing with health market issues and potential purchasers, potential partners at state level. You deal with a modern state in India. Its population actually exceeds that of the United Kingdom quite comfortably. I'm afraid Belgium, one of our most important trade partners, is an absolute midget, if you put it in terms of alongside India, not in its current value. I suspect we earn more in Belgium than we do in any Indian state. But looking to the future, looking to what happens next, looking to what happens as the global economy emerges from its present problems, and as we get back to normality, the excitement of India, the potential of India, the ability of the businesses already there to do extremely well, and many British businesses do very, very well in India, is very important to us. And all I've said about the relationship between our two countries, I think it remains important. I say all this finally because you probably gathered already, it is also one of my favourite countries. I think it's a marvellous place. If I ever decided to give up any kind of work or productive activity, I would quite happily spend my life trying to explore India. Its diversity is enormous, it just is a tremendously exciting, interesting, historic place. But modern India matters to British governments and will continue to do so. The modern Indian economy matters to British business and will continue to do so. So I hope everybody gets value from today's conference. I hope it helps those of you who are already active in India, encourages any of you who are not active in India to get yourselves more steadily involved. China, I'm also make excuses for, but the political system in India, for all its chaos, is a lot more attractive than that in China. Mr. Xi has a long way to go. And what I do like about the Indians, as I always said, the rule of law works in India and democracy works in India. And you just have that touch more certainty that you don't always have when you go into emerging markets and the developing world elsewhere. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.